Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Ready Steady Podcast. As usual, I'm joined by Barry.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whenever you choose to listen to us.
This is episode 15 of a podcast about board games. And as usual, we're going to start off with the news, and then we're going to go straight into the stuff we've been playing. So I can see that you've got some crowdfunding stuff here in the notes. Shall we kick off with a new reprint of an older classic from a well-known designer?
That's two of my options there, but I'll go with the first one. First one is the game Barony. So it's as he's mentioned, slightly older game. What's it, 2012? No, 2015. Telling you lies. Designed by Marc-Andre and previously published by Matago. This is currently on Kickstarter. Except this time it is now published by Grail Games. So I'll come back to what Barony is about, but the interesting part for news-wise to me is the interactions between Matago, Colossal and Grail Games. Matago recently sort of announced that they were stepping away from bigger and heavier and more sort of Eurocentric style games to focus on a family-friendly level of publishing. They obviously think they can make more money that way. Publishers making money, and that's fine. But they previously published bigger games like Inish and Kemet, which they've now handed over between the sort of three of them. So Barony is one game that they've obviously given to or exchanged with, shall we say, Grail Games, and Inish and Kemet are games that have gone to Colossal. Now, Kemet had a recent crowdfunding also on Kickstarter, but I believe Colossal was effectively behind the scenes for all of that, and they're going to be doing like all the fulfillment elements, and they were already in charge of it, so it just still had the Matago branding, I think, on the front of it. But yeah, interesting seeing how publishers have decided to go on very popular games, some of these.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I'm familiar with Colossal's sort of involvement in the for want of a better term, dudes on a Matago games. I don't know the nature of their relationship or why they are sort of partnered up on those. Maybe there was some cross-pollination at some point. But I do know they have a history of working together. I don't know where Grail Games fits into this.
Nor I. Whatever. I guess, it could just be a meeting of people, representatives of the publishers. They were at Essen, they were at UK Games Expo or something. They got talking, they were looking at, well, here's what we're planning on doing. It's like, well, if you don't want to publish Kemet anymore, I'll take it over. Yeah. But there's definitely a cross exchange of games. I can't remember exactly what ones have been announced as to what's going to come under which umbrella now. But Barony is one of them, and Grail Games.
No, Barony's been brought under the Grail Games umbrella.
Yeah.
And I was a little disappointed actually about that, just because I'm quite excited for Barony, which we'll get to, I guess, in a minute. But Grail Games overall have been a bit of a sort of a little bit sketchy with their previous endeavors. So, they're specifically, it was the crowdfunding campaigns they did for the Rainer Knizia and Vincent Dutrait collaborations. So that was Yellow and Yangtze. And that one, I think, was delivered to backers okay.
Yeah.
But there was another one they did called King's Road, which I believe they did faithfully fulfill, but then had already pissed off Dutrait and Knizia, so they were done with the company. And then they were left with a whole ton of retail stuff that I don't think they were allowed to sell. So they kind of quietly slipped into game stores and never really shouted about.
Gotcha. Let's have a...
So it's just it's not necessarily strictly a red flag, because I think as far as backers are concerned, they were always their expectations were met. If you've had a counter experience, comment on the podcast or send us an email, askreadysteadypodcast@gmail.com. Well, let us know about it. But I'm just, I'm conscious that they were sort of in the midst of fulfilling an ongoing crowdfunding partnership with Knizia and Dutrait when the two canceled their association with the company.
Yeah, but that was Whale Riders, right?
Yeah, they did Whale Riders as well, which is a pity because it's a lovely little game.
Not played it, but I don't think you'll be seeing that again anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a copy and I enjoy it. It's just a little sort of contract fulfillment sort of timing thing where you're sort of racing up and down a resource track and, sort of trying to beat your opponents to spots. But it's got, just really simple contract fulfillment, but lovely sort of timing considerations around the positioning of your opponents. And it looks really nice.
Pretty game. But back to Barony itself. And I have played Barony quite some time ago, probably around about when it came out, 2015, 2016-ish, give or take. I remember enjoying it. I remember it leading to some very heated table talk as we were, somebody sneaking in to claim the sort of end game points type deal. And as far as I recall, it's just a sort of area control game. There's very sort of minimal pieces. There's different terrain types and hexes on the board. You're moving your knights around to either destroy other people's villages or cities. You're building up your own. You're trying to control the parts of the map and just score some points. I remember it being quite simplistic in terms of what you can do, but the emergent element of the gameplay being quite fun as far as any medieval area control game can be. And there's the two expansions, or at least the original expansion, which is Sorcery, which is part of this Kickstarter, as well as a new expansion, I think Heroes, since the original expansions quite hard to get a hold of these days. So, and it's all fairly reasonably priced as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was really surprised sort of by the price and its competitiveness, I would say. I think you can get the whole box for less than £50 British, and that includes some shipping, I think, as well. Or possibly just tax. Yeah. Anyway. It is an area control game, and it's set out on these hexagons that represent different lands. And you're going to be putting your little wooden pieces, which are your knights, your cities, your castles, and your villages out on those spaces. And then you'll gather resources off those boards in order to build up to the cities, which is like points in the end. And you can also send your knights off to remove other people's pieces. And it's kind of like a straight sort of exchange where you remove a certain number of pieces to remove an opponent's piece. But it's really it's all about that sort of feeling of where am I going to go to get the points I need, and are people going to come and sort of try and stop me from doing what I need to do?
Anyway, I remember enjoying Barony. I know somebody's going to be backing it, so hopefully get to play it again.
Yep, likewise. I also remember enjoying it. I like these sorts of games. Marc-Andre, of course, did Splendor and did Majesty. Well, that was recently reprinted by one of the French publishers as I think it was just called Medieval, but Majesty was quite good as well. Anyway, Marc-Andre, good designer. I'll probably end up backing Barony. Yeah, it's the sort of thing I like.
Oh, was it Middle Ages? Yeah, that's what you're about.
Oh, Middle Ages. That's right. Recently republished as Middle Ages.
Gotcha. Well, actually, speaking of Middle Ages, it semi-leads me into my next bit of news, which is another reprint, same publisher this time, which is Kingdomino. So it's a new version of Kingdomino. It looks like, if not just the cover is new, it could well be that all the tiles are redone as well. And it seems to sort of coincide with the digital version. They seem to be pushing within the box. But it doesn't look significantly different, but the method of choosing tiles in Kingdomino, where you lay tiles out in a sort of ascending numerical order. The higher the value on the tile, the more scoring potential that tile has. But then you'll resolve your next pick based on the order in which you've chosen the current round's tiles, which is the same as Middle Ages. But I think Kingdomino's better than Middle Ages, and I also think Kingdomino Origins is the best version of Kingdomino. So, whilst it's interesting they're making a new version, it just does seem to be a new coat of paint, mostly to make it match, I think, the digital version. I still enjoy Kingdomino, play it on Board Game Arena, but the only one I own is Kingdomino.
Yep, I've played most of these as well. I really like Kingdomino. I like it best at 4 when it's most fighty for the tiles.
Yeah.
I think you can play it at lower counts, but it's best at 4. And yeah, I think interestingly, Queendomino is the only one my partner will play because she likes the sort of the scope for it to be more board gamey. I guess the vicious tile line drafting is something she likes less, but she will play it at 4. But Queendomino, I think it's too much. I don't think it's necessary.
And Queendomino I've actually never played. I've played sort of the Giants expansion for Kingdomino and the additional elements of deciding where to place your scoring tokens in the form of fire in Origins, or buying and placing cavemen on your board for scoring opportunities. Just is a little more interesting to me in Origins.
Yeah, I've played Origins. I like it just as well. I can see that if you've played a lot of Kingdomino, then those sort of extra little elements that spices up would be welcome. There's also the point that why not just have Origins? Although I don't think. I mean, you'd have to play with those extra little rules, but they're not much extra overhead.
No, and if you wanted to play base Kingdomino, the only real difference is the volcanoes for scoring. It's good, like it. Also, if you want my solo version, I put up solo rules on Board Game Geek. Works pretty well for Kingdomino Origin.
Oh, there you go. You can go check that out. Give Barry a geek coin or whatever if you like it.
I'll take a thumbs up.
So I just thought I'd give a couple of honorable shout outs to some Kickstarters we've already mentioned that I ended up backing, one of which is the new Root expansions. And, it's just 3 new factions that were previously available as print plays, I think. You've got the Twilight Council, which are the bats, the Lilypad Diaspora, which are frogs, and the Knaves of the Deepwood, which are badgers.
I think they're skunks. I think badgers already exists, does it not?
Oh, yes, you're right. The badgers are the the knights that collect relics. Oh yeah, fair enough. Anyway, I don't know much more about it. Other than that, I'll pretty much end up backing most Root expansions at this stage because I've got all the others. I've played them all and I like them a lot. And I find Root, in my gaming groups, very easy to get to the table and everyone knows how to play it. So we're always excited for more Root stuff.
I find Root, once you know every faction is different, you can just pick up a new faction and play with it. You might not do well, and nobody might really know what's going on, but you can at least, within the framework of the game, I think it's quite good at pushing you down a way that your faction works, just in terms of what your choices are on each faction board. So having another 3 factions, I don't play Root enough that I wish I had something else to play with. This is really boring. But just within that kind of mix up of the 2, maybe 3 times a year I might get to play Root, would just be worth tossing into the box. Yeah,
I agree with you in the sense that I think once you understand how Root works, it's fairly easy to just pick up a new faction and parse the rules. Doing well with it is a completely separate matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Lizard, you played much Lizards?
Yes, I played the Lizard.
Not very good with Lizards. I don't know how that works.
Yep, very hard to do. You can watch me play them incorrectly on the Root series we did on the channel if you like. I can't remember what rules we got wrong.
How does that help me?
look back at it and watch us get it wrong.
What not to do.
Yeah, well, exactly. How to play it badly. Not badly, incorrectly.
Incorrectly, like, yeah. Even worse.
But no, I've not had a chance to play the Lizards again since then, actually, but I've played against people using the Lizards who have had sort of similar complaints. Having said that, I'm not very good at Root. I tend not to win it, so I'm probably not a good person to listen to for that kind of stuff. But anyway, more Root. I'm sure if you are into Root anyway, you'll be well aware of that. And then the only other thing to mention really here for me is Half-Truth Second Guess is up on Kickstarter, which is like a mini expansion for Half-Truth, which if you didn't play it or hear about it, is a little trivia game which is designed by Richard Garfield with trivia questions by...
There's Ken Jennings for the
Ken
original.
Jennings, that's it. Yeah, I was about to say Ken Livingston.
Different person?
Yeah, I was like, that's not right. And it's got trivia questions by Ken Jennings, who's a game show champion. And the premise of Half-Truth is really sort of simple. You flip over a multiple choice question with 6 answers on it, and 3 of them are correct, and 3 of them are incorrect. And then you get to roll a little die, and the dice is going to affect the scoring for this particular question. Maybe it's doubled, maybe it's more points, maybe it's less points. And then you've got betting chips. And what you're going to do is you're basically going to bet on which ones you think are right and wrong. And it's kind of that simple, really. So you're just going to get, you can play it safe constantly by sort of just guessing what if one is right, or you can go all in and say, I know exactly which 3 are correct. And then you're going to get bonus points for being all correct. And I'm not a big fan of trivia. I'm not really good at it. And I find it's so binary, like it sort of locks people out. It's just it's so zero sum. And yet some people are also really good at general knowledge, but it's not the kind of thing where after I've played a game of general knowledge, I'm like, yes, now I know more general knowledge. I'll be more competitive next time, So I don't have that sort of like, I can get better at this feeling. So I like this because it's got this sort of gambling, push your luck scoring system that doesn't necessarily need to rely on you to know things absolutely. You just need to sort of be able to make your best guesses and sort of play conservatively at the right moments and go big in when, you think you have a chance. It's just a really sort of fun little party trivia type game. And anyway, they're reprinting it, so I thought I'd mention that. I don't know what's in the expansion. More questions, more trivia, a new way to play. Not sure. I think there's maybe a team mode or something now. Anyway, that's back on crowdfunding. Nice.
Certainly going back to the 1972 Genesis edition of Trivial Pursuit, that was something that was always floating around my house growing up. The questions were outdated by the time I was old enough to understand them, and junior Trivial Pursuit. But I have played... and you're right, it's not a huge amount of fun if you don't know the answers, but like Lord of the Rings, it's a Trivial Pursuit style game, and then Game of Thrones trivia game. And if you just don't know, like, it's just no fun. So things like this, things like Wits or Wagers, where you can have a sort of guess, and you can even get, sometimes bet on who you think's right, are good kind of trivia games to my mind. But of course, the big news of the week, and it'll be all over by the time people hear this podcast, is that in a couple of days, I'll be at BarryCon 3. So away for the weekends, playing games from Thursday afternoon until Sunday night / Monday morning, depending how early we get up.
I hope you all got your tickets.
We do have tickets, lanyards, medals, there's prizes.
Good stuff. Well, we'll be excited to hear what games you got to the table at BarryCon.
And what games have we managed to play these last couple of weeks?
Well, I'm mostly picking up on stuff that slipped off the schedule in the last episode, but you've got a few here to talk about as well that I'm keen to hear about because you've played a couple of things that I haven't played, but I've got or am keen to know more about. But seeing as how I've only got two, and they're both the same designer, I'm going to space them out.
Sure.
By starting off with one of mine.
Okay, sure. First and last.
First and last. So I've got, I'm going to kick this off actually, I think, with Galileo Galilei, which is...
Will you do the fandango?
Which is designed by Tomás Halek and published by Pink Troubadour, a small Spanish publisher with just, I think, 2 games to their name. This is one of them. It goes up to 4. It is a very solidly sort of middleweight Euro. It has a solo mode, so you can play 1 to 4. And it's about, of course, astronomy. You are the Renaissance astronomers looking up to the sky and first considering the fact that we might not be the center of the universe and God might not have created everything. What you are doing in the game is functionally contract fulfillment. But in summary, I'm not sure if this is not a fresh new take on Euros that's going to blow your mind. But it is, if you like your Euros, if you like middleweight Euros, this is a solid example of the genre with lots of nice little bits. And I enjoyed my time with it, even at 4, which is the maximum player count. The downtime was not too bad, and the minimal player interaction was not a major issue. So I did enjoy solving the puzzle and pulling the levers and pressing the buttons. I'd be reasonably happy to play it again. I think at least a few more times. There are a few mechanisms which I'll call out in a minute, which I thought were interesting and nice. But similarly, if you are tired of Euros or tired of sort of contract fulfillment, puzzly things with minimal player interaction, this is not going to suddenly change your mind about that feeling. So the game itself is you take on the role of these astronomers, and one of the things that's quite nice about it is it's just straight turns. So you just start going around the table. You keep going around the table. There is a first player marker and a sense of rounds only because when the game ends, you finish the current round, one more full round, and then the game is over. But there's no sort of necessary round structure during the game. It's just each player keeps taking a turn until the game ends, which is triggered by the deck of space running out. So effectively, the end of the game is triggered by we discovered all the stars, folks. We did it. It's all
every last one of them.
We've seen every last one of them that we could with telescopes from the 1600s.
Right.
So you've got the on your turn you're going to pick an action to do. The action it's almost like a personal rondelle on your player board, but it's sort of like a quarter rondelle, an arc, if you will. And the arc is made up of 2 segments, one above the other, and the one on the inside and one on the outside. And what you're going to do is you've got a telescope on your player board that points at one of the segments within the arc. And by pointing at a segment, it's sort of looking up into space through the segment, and the segment contains the 2 actions you're going to do. And you can rotate your telescope on your turn a few steps. And so this is the action constraint, right? You're picking a pair of actions to do which exist, and you're picking it by moving your little telescope, which is nice and thematic. And when the telescope gets to the point where it's staring directly up into space, it then resets to sort of perpendicular. And the inner segment rotates. So after you resolve the 2 actions on your turn, the tile that dictated which action you got to take, resets to the top of the segment and pushes the others around. So you sort of get this rotating inner segment with these fixed outer actions that they're playing against. And so this sort of mechanism of action tiles moving around and a set of fixed tiles and sort of things like that it's a nice mechanism. It's certainly not, I largely ignored it in the sense that I did not get too hung up on trying to build combos. But there were some nice, or not trying to build combos, sorry, trying to time combos on the rotating action tiles exactly right. Because it was a bit too difficult to foresee exactly how things were going to pan out and what I might need in a given moment, you know? Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure that was necessary anyway, because I think I scored quite well, despite the fact that I overlooked it. What I do think, the other thing that's notable is once you get to the final sort of step, which is where the telescope is pointing straight up, you will take the two actions there, and they're both fixed, actually. They don't move at all. And the action you get to take is basically upgrade one of the tiles. So everyone has the same set of action tiles, but you flip one up. You flip them over to upgrade them. And so you can start upgrading those. And I think one of the reasons I won the game in the end was because I'd committed to the most upgrades, you know, so it had this sort of snowball effect of points and benefits. But that's an interesting little puzzle. It's a nice little thing, but it's probably not as confounding as maybe it sounds or it might look when you first approach it. And then once you get to take the actions, a lot of them are about collecting dice, which are your resources. And I suppose the dice are abstractions of scientific information, something like that. But the dice come in 3 colors. They're never ever rolled. They're only trackers. And to that point, they've reordered the numbers on the die so that they're actually easier to use as trackers. But you'll collect the dice. They'll come onto your player board as ones, and then you can get actions to tick them up. So they go up to 2s and 3s and 4s. And then, or 5s and 6s. They're D6s. And then once you've got the sort of numbers and colors you need to observe a card, you can take this observation action and trade in those dice for what are called constellations, which are the sort of lesser contracts that you can fulfill. And you observe constellations, and that gets you straight points. Occasionally it might get you the attention of the Inquisition, which we'll hear more about in just a minute. But you can also trade in for major celestial bodies, which is the sort of much more significant observation, wherein you'll get things like Saturn or the moon. And comically, actually, in our game, we didn't observe the moon for a very long time. So even though we'd successfully charted Saturn and various moons on the far off planets, we'd not yet spotted our own or taken time to look at it properly. But those are where the big points are at. And when you collect one of those, you also get to write a little book about it, which is a track on your player board. So these contracts, once fulfilled, big chunk of points, and then they go into your player board where they'll line up rows. And if you think about each card adding a column to a set of rows that you can progress, so you're kind of building your own tracks, and each contract adds another step to the row of 4 rows. And so that's kind of nice to be able to build those tracks out, and you're sort of looking at the contracts and thinking like, oh, you know, where do I want these? Where do I want to try? Do I want this set of bonuses, or is that going to mess up one of my tracks that I'm building? But while this is going on and you're getting these contracts, you will also gain the interest of the Spanish of the Christian Inquisition, who are going to come over and make sure you're not a heretic, and they come and live in your cellar. So you've got this cellar on your player board, and when you gain the attentions of the Inquisition, they'll go into the first space of the cellar, and then you want to move them along the cellar. But if you can get this little icon that moves one Inquisitor 1 step, and if you move a single Inquisitor one step, it will trigger at the end of your turn an interrogation phase, where you will be interrogated. And if you have too many Inquisitors that you have not moved sufficiently far along the track, you'll take a big penalty to this main track on the main game board, which does bottom off quite quickly. Like, you can sort of hit the bottom of that track if you've really messed up with the Inquisitors. And then, you just take a sort of a -2 victory point penalty every time you bounce off the bottom, no matter how far down you should have gone. So it's not like super punitive, but there's some quite nice points if you can actually climb the track. And of course, there's actually further penalties on the track. So you want to try to get away from the bottom before the end, at least, even if you get stuck there during the game, which is quite possible, because what you ideally want to do is sort of get one Inquisitor at a time and get a number of movements in a single turn, because even just one movement will trigger the interrogation. But if you can get 4 or 5 movements, you can actually move them to the end of the track. And then during the interrogation, you'll take no penalties at all, because you've effectively successfully convinced the Inquisitor that science and space are real things, and they should go tell all their mates about them. And by dint of having them at the end of the track on your player board, they will actually go some way to mitigating the effects of further Inquisitors. So you're sort of collecting Inquisitors in your basement and converting them to the ways of science, which is, it's a fun system, because it sort of gives you something else to think about, like a sort of a cost that is almost like a sort of a sunk cost, right? Like there were some big moves I was observing that I could do in the end of the game. But I was like, if I do that, I'm going to take like 2 Inquisitors this turn. And then I'm going to have to figure out how to get these 2 Inquisitors out of my cellar before the end of the game, before too long. And it's difficult to do. So unlike other games, Euro games where you might sort of get to the end and everyone's doing these big plays, and trying to get these massive points, we're all sitting around going, okay, well, we really want to discover this final card, but I can't afford to have 2 Inquisitors in my cellar this close to the end of the game. Which was a nice sort of twist. And I think, probably I could have afforded to take another Inquisitor. So maybe the next time I play, I'll try to be a bit less cautious towards the end of the game. But it's nice that mechanism gave that extra flavor to it. And then, there's just the sort of standard Euro stuff, like sort of first come, first serve objectives. And there's also a multiplier that, several multiplier tracks you can go up based on criteria in the game. It's marketed as lecturing at the university, but each university has its own criteria that it's looking at and a score multiplier for that criteria. And that's all variable setup, which is nice. So you got these sort of different things that are going to be different every time you play.
No, it looks interesting. Like, I'm not fed up with Euro games, so the fact it doesn't perhaps do anything wildly innovative or unique isn't a concern, as long as it's a solid game that makes some interesting decisions, pull off a few clever moves. That's always fun.
Yep, exactly right. I think that is sort of exactly where it sits. Like, I think if your group's the sort of group that likes to sit around and play, these sorts of middleweight Euros, and you have a good time and you're always keen to discover a new puzzle, then this will be a pleasurable thing for you to discover, I think. And if that doesn't sound like you're in the market for a new puzzle, well then, so be it. There's nothing here that's sort of absolutely necessary. And you might also be put off if you look at the pictures and see just how beige it is. But actually, and it is very beige. But actually, the space cards, although they are beige on the back, have lovely art on the front. And although it's a shame that once you buy the card, it's flipped over to the beige side and put on your player board, the actual tableau of cards on the board during the game is very, very, it's very nice. The art of on those cards is really pretty.
Nice. Oh, well, maybe get a go at some point. But so many games. There's too many games.
It's hard to say, because after we played it, I played it with my board game group. They were interested in acquiring a copy, and I think I pretty sure it's been picked up for North American distribution by Capstone Games. I don't know about European distribution. Pink Troubadour are based in Spain, but they're a very small publisher, and I don't know if they have even European distribution themselves. So when it becomes widely available, I mean, I imagine it will do, because I think it's probably been reasonably successful, or that's the impression I get with no actual data. But I don't know how and when it will be available for wide release, unless you go to get it through the US distribution.
Gotcha. Yeah, like the forums are just wide release EU Italian version. So yes, seems like it might be a little tricky to get a hold of at the moment.
Well, they've used Latin in the game, so it's all language independent. So if you happen to get your hands on a foreign copy of it, all you need is the English rulebook, which I'm sure you can get on BGG.
Yep, it is indeed. Nice one. Well, let's keep you in the conversation. And I'll just have a quick recap of a game talked about last week, something you've talked about before, which is Arcs. And
I'm excited to hear this.
Well, here we go. Yeah, so just from my one line of notes.
Barry's crossed out all of our notes.
And it just says, my notes for this one: played again, had a terrible time. So,
oh no.
So played it again, just the base game still. 3 of the players from the first game we had, 1 new player, but very, very capable at games. Although I don't think that makes too much of a difference for your first game or 2 of Arcs, right? It's something quite to itself when it comes to games. It's not I wouldn't say you got hugely transferable skills just from playing.
There's not a lot of like sort of common board game heuristics in Arcs. I'd say, I was thinking about this the other day, and I was saying to a friend of mine, I think like some of the stuff that might set you up well for Arcs are like sort of traditional card games, like, and I've forgotten the name of all the ones I wanted to compare it to. So, come back to me on that.
If that comes back to you, fine.
Editor Mike just jumping in here with a post-production note. So I'm thinking specifically of the climbing school of card games here, which often go hand in hand with shedding card games. So the premise here is that you've got to play increasingly large or specific hands of cards that beat your opponent's hands in order to get rid of all your cards. So a very popular example would include Scout from Oink Games, but also includes Tichu, Llama, and Haggis. There's a lot of variations of these with traditional card games as well. Another good example of a shedding card game is Uno, but of course that's not really a climbing card game. And of course, when I'm thinking about Arcs, I'm making the comparison to climbing card games rather than shedding, because in climbing, the lead player will continue to play over and over again, enabling them to get rid of their cards more quickly, which is the goal in those sorts of games typically. Of course, in Arcs, the goal is much more diverse. It's not about getting rid of all your cards. But if you can hold on to the lead and deny your opponents the opportunity to play, then you'll do very, very well.
I will say there is one rule we still got wrong, but everything else we at least played correctly this time. We allowed multiple ship builds at a spaceport, so you can only do one. So thankfully that puts a big asterisk on this game, because it finished at the end of turn 3 with 1 player on 39 points, which was outrageous. So
it's a big score, yeah.
Yeah, like it's a big score, and getting 20, I think got 25 points. They got the full points in the 3rd round. So they won all 3 objectives. They had all their cities on the board for the bonus 5 points to score the maximum 25.
Wow.
And I mean, fair enough. Like, they played, let's take nothing away from them. They played very well. But we did not. The rest of the players did not. And it was scuppered in a large part by the new player. And the other player just not getting how big a threat this guy was. So my 2nd and 3rd rounds were grim. I had no cards that would let me do anything. I wanted to be attacking this player that won, but I couldn't get the cards down that would let me do it, and nobody was really playing the cards I needed to get across. I'll explain a little bit about why it went so terribly wrong. Right, the board setup, each player has their own starting planets, which gives them easy access to certain tokens. So the player that won was the psionic player, no, not the psionic player, the relic player. They had easy access to relic. Yeah, so they had easy access to relics, which they were using really well to pick up court cards, right? To give them unique powers and then differentiate the powers. The player that was new was on the battle planet, and so they were able to turn their actions into attacks. And in a, not exactly a twist, I mean, they went for it, but they also picked up the court card that gave them 2 extra dice within the, what's the middle of the board called? The inner ring. I can't remember. The gates. Is that what it's called?
The gates, yeah, within the gates. Yeah.
Right. So they ended up with initiative. End of round 1. Round 2, they immediately activated the warlord ambition, and they had 5 battle cards in their hand. And unfortunately, at this point, I was the only one with anybody still in the gates, and I had 2 sets of ships still in the gates as I was preparing to move in to stop the player that eventually won. But then my forces were decimated by this player getting 2 additional dice for all their attacks there, and then me being the only person they wanted to attack on that one. And I wasn't able to kind of come back, so I wasn't able to get in on this, the player that won. And actually, all of round 2, I had nothing I could do. I did seize initiative by spending the second card to try and get some builds and moves and stuff going. But throughout the second turn, that player was still building up their court and getting their buildings out to pick up the maximum points from winning ambitions. And then in the third round, I had a similar problem where none of the cards allowed me to get in at them, and nobody else seemed to recognise the threat despite me pointing it out. Because I think they were just, we're only on round 3. I was like, yeah, but you understand every time he wins something, he's getting 5 additional points, and he's already 7-8 points ahead of us at this stage. And so basically it was not fun. It's the kind of game that can be scuppered by other players to some degree. Now, this goes directly opposite to what people want and why people say, in an uninteractive Euros, multiplayer solitaire, but I would much rather be building up my own stuff that other people aren't going to ruin for me than have other people not recognise when they need to be the checks and balances in a game. I think in the future, people have a better idea about it, and it's certainly the kind of game that rewards multiple plays with the same players. But my first game was much more enjoyable. We did play the rules wrong, or much more wrong in that first game. But also, nobody really knew what they were doing, and it just went a little bit longer, and everybody had a chance at doing something. In this game, it felt very much like I couldn't do anything, and not necessarily through any fault of my own. And so I've now seen the side of the game where people are complaining about, lack of agency and, single actions when other players are getting 4 actions in a turn. And you can have a whole chapter of that, a whole sort of 6 or 5 or 6 actions where that happens. And there's not a huge amount you can do about it necessarily. So we'll probably end up playing it again, but it wouldn't be my first pick anymore. I'm not excited to play it again. But hopefully it'll be with the players that I've already played. And hopefully something I noticed there, I think that the player that starts on the military planet does have to stop the player on the relic planet. It feels a little bit like Chaos in the Old World, where, Nurgle has to rein in Khorne, who has to attack Tzeentch. That kind of feeling to it. I think there's an element of that on the board. Like, I'm still only a couple of games in, so can't be definitive about how that works. But it did look like the player with the relic power was able to get an early lead with a sort of engine through the courts. The military player should have swooped in to start doing raids to take some of them from them. And I've not worked out what the other 2 players should really be doing yet, but That seems to be a potential route for the meta. Because otherwise, because what the military player was complaining about was he had no way of securing anybody in the courts. And I was like, well, if you go and raid their starport, you can take one of their characters, which is what kind of needed to happen. So, as I say, it's early doors in the strategy. I've not looked at the strategy forums or anything, but it wasn't fun.
So I've seen. So I've got sort of two thoughts on this. But I think, yeah, that sounds like a bummer. I think in terms of relying on other players to read the board state and sort of do something about it, that's always a frustrating experience. And I think that is also something that's quite a, it's sort of an issue with these sorts of games. And I'm surprised that, well, you said that the player who won made a huge swing in chapter 3. Is that right?
They were already ahead, and they were positioned to do better that round. The fact they won all 3 was maybe it was a reasonable play from them, in as much as they got an extra card that round, and so they had like a free additional go as well, which let them swing that final two of the ambitions. But then again, people should have not been declaring the ambitions, because it wasn't as if he was in the lead from the start. They should have seen that they weren't going to be able to hold that. So yeah, anyway.
Yeah, so I think like games like games where there is a victory point track and you can see who's ahead on the victory point track. Now, we can have a whole discussion around the subtleties of board state and whether or not a victory point track's a good heuristic for who's winning. But you can at least make the argument that, whoever's top on the victory point track is currently winning. And it's a very basic heuristic. And so it is frustrating when somebody's ahead on the victory track and people aren't doing anything about that player's board state advantages.
Yeah.
And I think, to an extent, you have to play these sorts of games, whether it's ARCs or whether it's, Chaos in the Old World or Cthulhu Wars or, Risk. You have to play it in a way to balance out a leader with a solid advantage. That's kind of the point, right? Because inherently, if the game's profited a lot from beating up on people who are behind, then it wouldn't be fun for that person. Having said that, I actually think ARCs does go a little bit against the grain, in the sense that it's quite hard to gang up on a leader, or rather even on a specific player in ARCs. And you might have had this, again, a little mitigated by the rules error in that game, where players were building more ships than they had shipyards, because if you don't need a lot of shipyards, it is very easy to get all your cities out.
Mm-hmm.
But often the cost of getting all your cities out is being unable to build a big military because you haven't got any shipyards.
Yeah.
So there, if you can spend 4 construction pips to just put out 4 ships at one shipyard, that's pretty broken, honestly.
Yeah. But again, the player that won wasn't through military prowess, right? They never attacked anybody anyway, so.
Right, and so if the military thing hasn't really come into it, then it is just other players, and so. The thing is, obviously military action in ARCs is a big way to counter what other people are doing and scupper their plans or change the direction. The other thing is not to let players control the ambitions, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can declare an ambition that somebody is just miles away from doing. It is frustrating when the winning player is competing on the same fronts that you're competing on. And but I would argue there's a case where, if you think you've got a good shot at Tycoon, but the player who's ahead of you has a better shot at Tycoon, it might just be better to, sack off that battle and start declaring things that nobody's going for, to try and sort of rebalance the board state. Or alternatively, if this person's parked up on all the relic planets and they have a bunch of relics, then you declare for Oracle?
Cyric and Oracle or something. I can't remember. But
declare for the ambition that wants relics, and then suddenly you actually point a target at that player and say, hey, this player's got all the relics, and all the relic planets. Get them.
Yeah, that was all part of it. I mean, it was Tycoon that was declared, and that the winner for that moved around the other three of us. But then the final action, because this player had all their cities out, they were able to tax and take all the, the guild cards that store the materials and
the Monopoly cards.
Fuel. Was able to take them all from the other players that were ahead on Tycoon and steal that with his last action, which also, and because he had so many guild cards, he was winning on all the icons. And it was just, anyway. So I'd play again. I'd hope people would be more aware of the board state, given another go, but I'm not. Even if I'd lost in that manner, but I'd lost because I didn't do something rather than couldn't do something, I would have been more fine with it, but it wasn't fun. We'll introduce the leaders next time, leaders and lore, and we'll see how that goes.
Yep. And make sure you remember that starport thing. Yeah,
that was the last rule I think we got wrong. Everything else we're back on. But like I say, it's a lot less fun only getting one thing every time you play a card now, but fine. If that's how it's played, then.
I mean, I don't think it's not a game of abundance. It's a game of scraping by with the bare minimum that you've got, or you're allowed to have, and sort of excruciating decisions of, if I could just lead with this card, life would be okay, but I really need to use it now because I'm never going to have a chance to lead with it if I'm honest with myself.
Yeah.
I was thinking as well about sort of, because I've played a game of Arcs with a player who was effectively eliminated. I've actually played a couple of games like that. One of which was in one of the Blighted Reach campaigns. I think I talked about that when I talked about the campaign, but at the end of the second game, because it's 3 games of Arcs in the Blighted Reach, the player had been effectively eliminated, but we were able to find a fate, which is those sort of roll cards, in the third game that would let them still play and actually be competitive despite the fact they had 0 board presence. But in the regular games of Arcs, I've seen someone get sort of effectively eliminated and there's not much coming back from it. And I don't know if that is functionally a skill issue or if it was just bad luck. I think there does appear to be a lot of luck in the game because of all the cards and dice. But I would make the case that, I've also seen, I was thinking about what makes you good at Arcs. And I think, Arcs is a game of it's not a game of long-term strategies. It's a game of very short-term opportunism and sort of seizing the moment for gains when you can. And I'm quite good at that. So I'm not bad at Arcs generally. I'm quite good at sort of understanding the value of the board state and of things. And I'm not averse to taking a risk for a gain if I think it's going to be worth it. But I'm not terrible at also avoiding taking too big a risk for too little payoff. Now that makes me okay at Arcs. But I think the real skill at Arcs comes from the same sort of skill as, I was trying to think of the classic card game that sort of links in with this. Because actually at Essen we were playing a bunch of a game called Panda Spin, which is another take on this same sort of thing. And the one that comes to mind is this classic Chinese card game called Big Two. But I won't explain the rules of that. But if you know classic card games where effectively you're trying to become a leader in a sort of, and you're playing out hands or cards, it's not trick taking exactly, but someone's leading with a type of hand or a type of card, and then everyone else has to follow that type. But it sort of escalates, and you're trying to outplay the opponents, and the objective is to get rid of your whole hand. So you're trying to strategize around playing the cards by guessing what your opponents have and knowing that you can probably win each round of play. And ideally what you want is for your opponents to never have a turn while you just play out your whole hand, right? that's the sort of the modus operandi in Big Two. And also to an extent in a classic card game called Sevens, which is all about like when you can play cards face up onto the table. But Sevens is very much luck based. There's not much skill to it. But it's the same kind of thing. You want to hold on to being able to play for as long as possible to get through your hand. And Arcs is kind of the same thing. Like, if you want to be really good at Arcs, being able to understand what's in your hand and what your opponents have so that you can just be constantly leading is a phenomenal skill. I've only seen one person do it one time and they stormed to victory. It was amazing. I was like, I couldn't even be mad. I was like, you are incredible at like calculating probability and constantly locking us out. And the only way we could get the initiative was to take it. And then we constantly had less rounds. Mm-hmm. It was so frustrating, but it was just so consistently well executed. I was like, this is skill. It's not just luck.
Well, the one thing we may or may not have been getting correct, obviously some cards are removed from Arcs at the beginning of the chapter.
Yep.
Anybody that was playing a face down card, we made sure to discard face down. I don't know if they get revealed at the end or not.
No, they don't.
Okay, fine. So there's a bit too much unknowns there then. I mean, you'd have to assume what the player had given up face down. And things along those lines. But yes, if you can
I agree. Like, to me, the act of being able to predict anything like that seems completely impossible. I'm like, there's too much unknown information. Yeah. I could never do that. But I saw this guy do it, like, for the whole game.
Maybe he's marked the back of the cards.
But it was my copy. Like, it was amazing. I was like, this is too consistent to just be luck. And it's probably about sort of probability and also being able to sort of intuit what other people have based on sort of what they're playing and what they're trying to play. But it's a skill that because I don't play a lot of those classic card games. I mean, I used to play classic card games when I was a kid, but not that sort of card game. So it's just something that's sort of, I'm not very good at. But, if you were good at it, it'd be really good to have that, to be able to play Arcs with that. But
fair.
But I think we do come back to the fact that Arcs is super mean, and it's certainly not going to be for everyone. It's really about just everyone kicking each other's sandcastles to the ground, and hoping that you're going to score points for it.
Anyway, that's a game we've discussed before. Let's talk about some new games, shall we?
Yeah, but it's a really interesting game, Barry.
I'm over it.
All right,
terrible. New games. What new games have I played? So newer games or newer releases at least. I recently played Invincible, the hero building game. So there's a previous Invincible game, the dice game I want to say, which was terrible. And then there's a new game which is not out yet that is a standalone expansion to a game system that already exists. But this one is its own thing. Published by Direwolf, who do Dune Imperium, Clank, and designed by Kevin Spack. So Invincible, the hero building game, as I say, got to be careful which one you pick up, is a 1 to 4 player cooperative hero building game where players activate powers on cards and characters they have by drawing cubes from a bag. In the bag, you can develop what cubes are in there, and you can buy new powers through buying cards, and the aim of the game is generally to get through a scenario, a story, and you do this by rescuing civilians, defeating minions and enemies, all while thwarting the main villain's scheme. Each scenario, and I can't remember how many there are, there's a reasonable number, I think 6-ish, and there's different degrees of difficulty you can make it for playing. Has a selection of cards that you build up at like level 1, 2, or 3 based on the villain track. So it tells you how to set up those cards, and those cards are always they're not minions. I forget what they're called. They're villains. I think the arch villain's the overall one that you're fighting. You've got different villains. There's 3 zones. for you to cover, and that's the same whether it's, you're playing solo or playing with 4 players. But with more players, more stuff will come out. But those enemies will go into those zones, you'll have to move around, but to move around you have to spend cubes from your bag on your move action, and once you've done your moves, if there's nobody left there to punch, you can't do any more punches. If you're the enemies after everybody's had a go, you'll flip a card and see kind of what happens there, whether that's the villain activates, minions activate, whether the you have to add something to the board or move those survivors or the civilians around. And you can lose the game either by having too many KOs, and you can get knocked out in this game, but it's not a game ender, you can be brought back into it. But if you get knocked out, say 3 times, that's game over. 3 times collectively. If all the civilians are threatened or killed even, you can lose the game that way. And if you fail to thwart the villain at various stages, sometimes they've got like maybe a 3-part scheme, and if you've not thwarted the first part of the scheme by turn 3, you would lose. If you've not thwarted this next part of the scheme by turn 5, you'd lose. Those kind of things. And it's actually pretty decent. The economy of pulling cubes from a bag, the cubes are different colours, and the colours have to match the action you want to take. Now each turn you're going to pull out 3 cubes, and among the cubes in your starting bag are black cubes, which are wild, so it can be any colour. However, once you've pulled 5 of those, your hero's exhausted, and you won't be able to do anything else for the turn. You won't get to spend those cubes. That'll kind of be you out of the round. And in fact, you get fatigued and knocked over, and if you're not helped back to your feet by the end of the round, then you are, you're struggling to some degree. And it's a sort of push your luck element to the game, where if you've got 3 black cubes out, you're like, okay, well maybe I can get another 3. But if you pull, 2 additional black cubes out, then you've wasted that turn or wasted any potential rewards for that go. Each player will pull 3 cubes out at the same time, and you can spend them in any order. So this is an interesting part of the cooperative nature of the game. You could spend 1 cube, which might let you move to a player. Then that player could spend a cube that'll heal you, and then you can spend your cubes to attack somebody after seeing potentially the outcome of another player's actions. But until everybody's spent the 3 cubes that they pull, nobody pulls any more cubes. And so it's always 3 cubes at a time, and it's always all together, but your turn is free-form and free-flowing. You can do any number of actions any amount of time. If you want to back up, if you're if one of the players wants to take a risky action, you can be like, well, I'll wait, I can always heal you if it happens, so you go first, and you can let them go and before deciding what to do next. And then at the end of every round, once every player passes, because you don't want to be pulling that 5th black cube, then you can discard cards from your hand to gain new cubes. During part of the turn, you're putting orange cubes on learning abilities. That will let you buy the cards from your hand. You've got 4 slots, in fact 6 slots I think, for powers, one of which will be your special power unique to the character. You can always replace them, but you're looking at making sure you've got everything covered. Is there enough thwart? Is there enough attack? Is there enough special actions to let you do different things? And overall, it's actually quite a fun game. The build-up between rounds of gaining additional powers and new cubes in the bag, very solid, works quite well. The push the luck element means it's not, fully deterministic. And you also don't know what cubes you're going to get out. Maybe you need a big attack turn, but you've got a thwart. You're pulling out all your thwart cubes or your move cubes, and if you're not getting them in the right order, you have to change up what you're doing. It's not been too difficult, but there are ways to adjust the difficulty, whether adding harder enemies, more minions. You can also add in, I think, I've not done this yet, Omni-Man, who as like an additional bad guy flying around interrupting kind of what you're doing. And so there's some legs to the game as well. It's not just those. I think it's 6 scenarios. You can add to it. And then there's the big campaign throughout where you're going to be tracking how many points you get for every round. You get additional points. Let's say you put Omni-Man in, you'll get, like an additional 20 points if you complete it when he was active. And so you're pushing for that top level of scoring to complete the campaign across the 6 games. So all in all, yeah, good fun. I like bag building, or any of the pool builder style games, and this has been decent so far.
Well, I've quite enjoyed the Invincible TV series. I mean, it's quite it's an odd mashup, right? Because it's quite tropey, but also like, it's got that sort of angle where it's a bit goofy and silly and kind of self-aware and tongue-in-cheek. I do like bag building.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, you probably like it. The story-wise, I think it's just sort of most... I think it's only like half of season 1, so like the first 6 episodes or 8 episodes or whatever within there. So you can certainly see there'll be potential for additional scenarios if the game does well.
Yeah, no, there's a lot more than half a season of Invincible.
Yeah.
Although I was thinking about, you said 3 unconscious, 3 knockouts
KOs,
yeah. I've seen that show. He takes way more than 3 knockouts. Like, I mean, he gets really badly beaten up quite often.
Yeah, it can very much happen. Like you chances are a player at least will get KO'd in any given time.
So can you, when you play with other people, do they play other characters?
Yeah, there's 4 characters. There's Invincible, Atom Eve, Robot, and Rexplode. Right. They've all got the sort of strengths and weaknesses. Robot's is sort of a support character. He can send his drone over to assist. He has special cards that he can put out that's going to amplify some actions. Rexplode's really good at dealing with minions. There can often be a number of minions that are... you have a limited number of attacks. So if you're spending a 3 damage attack to take out a 1 hit point minion, where you're much better off taking out the villains that are also in that area. So Rexplode helps there. Atom Eve is a little better at rescue, so controlling the civilians and moving them around. Robot's also quite good at thwarting. And then Invincible's better at punching. So every character is unique, but you get the chance to build your own hero. That's the whole point of the game. Whatever card you have, maybe you have to pivot into being the threat management guy, or maybe you have to pivot into being the lead damage guy, depending on what cards you end up pulling. And then there's also cards I've also not played with yet are the sort of modifiers to the powers. They're like, forget what they're called, like extraordinary type powers, where you get to modify one of your cards. You can't use that action until you've completed the action on the original card, but then you're powered up. You can get like a souped up version of it, as long as you pull the right cubes again. So there's enough there. There's a good game there. And if you like co-op games, you can play it solo. I've mostly played it solo. But it's a solid co-op. Particularly if you like Invincible, you don't have to like Invincible. The goriness, shall we say, of the TV show and the comics isn't front and center. There is some elements of cartoon violence, shall we say, but even if you don't like Invincible, or even if you have no interest in Invincible, the game mechanisms are solid enough to carry it.
Very good stuff. Well, you'll have to update us if they come out with the Seth Rogen expansion, because I want to play that character.
Could well happen. Boys expansion as well. Crossover.
Yeah.
Other new games I've played, recently just took delivery of Kelp. So Kelp is a game from Wonderbow Games, designed by Carl Robinson. And asking a Scotsman to say the word Carl is that Carol or Carl? Who knows?
Carl.
Yeah, Carl. Andrew, best Andrew Lincoln impression. to get there. But Kelp is a 2-player only game of cat and mouse, or in this case, octopus and shark. Is an asymmetric game where both sides are trying to eat. However, the shark wants to eat the octopus. So, the game's fully, as I said, asymmetric. What the octopus is doing, what the shark are doing, very different, except they're both playing sort of on the same board. So the board is set up with the octopus hidden. There are 9 sections on a circular grid. I know that maybe doesn't make too much sense. Imagine a big circle that's divided by an octothorpe. That's a hashtag for you kids at home. and that creates 9 sections on the board, as well as lines. So the shark is going to travel around the outside of the board and across these lines, and the octopus is somewhere hidden within one of those 9 zones. And the octopus is hidden on little rectangles. So people that are familiar with like commanding colours or commanding series, where you've got a tile, you can see what's on it, but your opponent has no idea. They just see this blank tile. That's
Stratego.
Stratego, yep. Exactly like that. So the octopus player, in order to win, has to eat 4 tiles worth of food, which they have to buy as part of a deck building upgrade before putting on the board and then moving the octopus adjacent and eating it. So you would think that at some point the shark's going to know where the octopus is and go and eat them, but it's not that simple, Jack. So the octopus wins by eating these 4 types of foods. The shark wins by eating the octopus, or the shark loses by running out of energy. It's just too tired. It didn't get to eat an octopus. It's done. It just sinks to the bottom of the ocean. So we've got those. So the octopus goes first, I think. Doesn't really matter. But the octopus has a hand of cards and a deck of cards that they want to play. And in order to play a card, you have to pay the cost. And the cost is paid by revealing one of these 9 tiles that's on the board. Now, many of those tiles do nothing, right? They're just effectively blank. They've got a shell on them, but they don't do anything. But by playing those cards, it will allow you to swap tiles. It will allow you to re-hide tiles. It will allow you to move tiles around, or shuffle tiles, it's called, where basically the shark doesn't know which ones you put where. Or it will allow you to buy new cards, and new cards are more powerful, but you've got to go through your deck like a deck builder before you get those cards again to see them, for the most part. And what the octopus is trying to do is buy the food, put the food on the board, move to the food, eat the food. Each food has a special power that makes the octopus a little bit stronger, and if it eats all 4 food, it wins. The shark has a totally different method of playing, where every turn it's going to roll 2 dice. 3 dice? 2 dice. 2 dice. And there's 3 different colours of dice. There's red dice, which allow it to attack. There's yellow dice, which allow it to have a little look at what's in an area. And blue dice, which help it move around the board. But each of the sections on the board have a different numerical requirement to exceed in order to perform that action in that space. So a blue dice can be put anywhere, and it helps the shark move around. It'll let you skip a space effectively by having it on the board. And you can chain those into current, so you can whiz around the board quite quickly. The yellow just lets you have a look at a tile. So you would lay a tile down, stops the octopus using it to pay for things, but also lets you see what's on it. Some tiles, however, are traps. And if you have a look at a tile that's a trap, a bad thing will happen to you.
But you get inked.
And the final one's the attack. When you attack an octopus, when you attack a space, if it's something that's not an octopus, doesn't matter. You just get to see it. If it is the octopus, there goes to a final showdown, and there's 3 cards, and it's like rock, paper, scissors. The octopus picks a card, you pick a card, and if they're the same card, because one cancels out the other, then the shark eats the octopus and wins. Fine. If they're different, you remove whichever card the octopus chose from the shark's hand as well, and then next time he bites some, there's 2 you've got a 50-50, right? So there's only 2 cards now that the octopus can choose from. So if you do manage to get 3 attacks on the octopus, you're guaranteed to win. But that's easier said than done because, first of all, you only start with 2 red dice in the bag. So you have to find a way of getting a 3rd red die. And similarly, every time you bite, you become a little bit more tired. So there's an energy track that goes along the side. And if you put 6 dice in there, say, then the shark gets too sleepy, not eating anything, dies. In addition to this, every time you're spending your dice, you can store some dice in energy. You can use those energies to pay for more dice into your bag, as well as a special power. Plus, dice that you use go into a track which powers up your shark. So there's a lot going. It sounds like there's a lot going on. The game's not super difficult, but the bluffing element of where's the octopus, what am I going to look at, as well as a sort of luck element of what am I going to draw from the bag. Is it going to let me attack? Let's say you knew where the octopus was and you didn't draw a red die. You're not going to be able to bite it this turn, and it might be because you have to move as the shark. Maybe you have to move away from it. Normally you can just go around the corner and bite it again, but there's a forced move element there. And it's fun enough. I've played it a couple of times now. It's a decent enough game. There's something that's a little lacking for it. The showdown in particular, where I'm saying picking from those 3 cards, the rock, paper, scissors element of the cards, it feels a little bit out of either player's control. Sure, if the octopus wins, the octopus gets a power, which might be move the shark to a corner or hide 2 tiles or something like that. So you could try and figure out what the octopus might want. But you're almost as well picking at random to some degree. Like if both players were to shuffle and flip one, it wouldn't change the game significantly. And I would say that might be an option. But, you know, if you think there's a mind game element there where you know what the octopus is going to choose and you can outthink them or whatever, fine. Getting 3 attacks on the octopus is very hard. And the octopus does have a reasonable strategy for sort of turtling up in one of the harder to bite areas and trying to just get as much food, you know, just keep buying food and eating the food as quickly as possible, because the shark will probably struggle to buy dice, get into that corner, roll a high enough red number while still powering up. Later in the game, the shark has more options in terms of how they pick dice, add dice to the bag, or change the dice face with various mitigation elements, rerolls, or adding values, or anything like that. But early on, it's quite tough. So if the octopus rushes a food strategy, that seems to be the dominant way of winning at the moment. But we'll see how it pans out with a few more games.
And did you try both sides?
I've only ever been the shark. I think with all these games, the player that has the least experience should probably play the octopus, not just because it's necessarily stronger, but also because there's no hidden information if you're the octopus player. Whereas if you were the shark, you wouldn't maybe understand what's going on. So everybody, it's kind of been a new player I've played with, or somebody with only a couple of games under the belt, or they've played the octopus and they wanted to play the octopus again. And I was fine with that. I've not yet won the game as the shark, but I'm sure it's possible.
And did you try any of the little expansion box?
Yeah, so the Kickstarter came with a number of expansions, whether that's additional powers that you would chain into the longer the game goes, whether it is multicolored dice. There's a couple of multicolored dice which you could use as either, pretty good, as well as there's another side of the board which changes up the die rolls necessary. So there's one corner that's harder to get into than the other. So you might think, actually, if I was the octopus, I'd go into that corner. But then the octopus might think, well, I know that you know that I would go into the corner, so I'm going to go into the other corner. You know, that kind of thing to mix it up. There's a couple of powers that would let you... there's like a coconut and stuff. So the answer to that is no. But I have had a look. I'm still just playing the base game. I'll throw in some of the expansions at some point and see how it goes. I think there's like 6 changes to it. 3 favour the shark, 3 favour the octopus. It might be that I want to throw in something that favours the shark. The turtle and eat strategy continues to prove dominant.
Okay. Well, I've got a copy here. I'm excited to give it a try, but I haven't managed to table it yet.
It's decent, and it looks really nice as well. If you have the octopus miniature, which you probably will have, it can hold the hand-size coin. So these are 2 completely unnecessary elements to the game. But we're like, well, what do you do with the octopus mini? And then we realised it could hold the coin within its grasping tentacles. So don't forget to do that.
It sits by the side of the board and looks thematic. At least you know there's an octopus there because the mini's there.
Well, a couple of games I want to talk about. One we've been waiting for a long time to be chatting, but one that's kind of snuck in quickly here because it's now, I think it's beta still on Board Game Arena, but the Game Found campaign recently ended. I'm sure it'll be available for late pledges sometime soon, if not already. And this is Dinogenics. So a game by Ninth Haven Games and designed by Richard Keane. And Dinogenics is Jurassic Park without the license. There's a few games that are like that. So it's a 1 to 5 player worker placement game about building a dinosaur park. If only there was something like that that you can draw inspiration from. And the version that's on board...
Pretty sure Jurassic Park was based on Dinogenics, actually.
Yeah, that way around, definitely. The version that's on Board Game Arena is the updated effective 2nd edition version. So the 2nd edition update to the rules. I'm not 100% sure what's different between the first version. I never played it. I always wanted to play it, but nobody ever had it. So this version seems to have streamlined a number of things. The version on Board Game Arena doesn't have the expansions, but just the base game. But in the game, you are collecting dinosaur cards, and you're using that to create dinosaurs in the lab. You're spending money to build enclosures to put the dinosaurs in. You can upgrade your park, whether that is the park itself or the facilities surrounding it, hotels, cafes, things along those lines. And you're using the sort of worker placement slots out on the board to potentially get the food for your carnivores, to play event cards from your hand that do different things, to some degree sabotage your opponents, or to, let's say a dinosaur escaped and ate some of the guests in your park. You would have a scandal token, which is minus points at the end of the game. You'll be doing PR to clear up your reputation and get rid of those scandal points, stuff along those lines. And it's a game played over, I want to say 6 rounds. No, that's a lie. It's at least 8 rounds. In fact, I think it is 8 rounds. And every dinosaur in your park adds to your reputation, and that determines sort of first player for the future rounds. But they're also worth attraction points, and that's what you're scoring points on. So very important to get dinosaurs down early to score some early game points, because it can be that if you are even a round, maybe not a round, but like if you're 2 rounds late to building a dinosaur because you're holding out for a really good dinosaur, you might have already lost whatever advantage that dinosaur would give you points wise. So it's relatively important that you get things down, just to prevent that sort of runaway leader element where they've got the higher reputation because they've got more dinosaurs, they're gaining points because they've got dinosaurs, and they're earning income because people are coming to their park first. So that's one thing that the first player or the player order determines, is how many visitors come to your park, which can determine how much money you make. And so there's a little snowbally element if you fall behind, but really after your first game you just shouldn't do that. Again, like it's a little bit of knowledge of the game. Don't hold out for a T-Rex when you could get a couple of Triceratops down, you know?
No, I want to hold out for the T-Rex, Barry.
Just get a T-Rex in a couple of turns, you'll be fine.
Oh.
But the good thing about Dinogenics over, say, something like Dinosaur Island or Dinosaur World is really each dinosaur does something different. So it's not just different reputation points and different attraction points. They've also got different conditions. So let's say you had 3 Triceratops or 4 Triceratops, you would gain additional points for having multiple Triceratops in that single enclosure. Let's say you had, I'm trying to think what the pterosaurs or pterodons do, but like having a couple of them did something as well. I can't remember exactly. But like,
so there's sort of a set collection element, or is it more like turning
the set collection
asymmetrical powers?
Not so much asymmetrical because everybody's got access to them, but they all do. Right. Each dinosaur gives you different scoring conditions, or some powers. It could be, if you got 3 Velociraptors, gain 2 extra bucks. Those kind of conditions. But everybody's got access to them. The set collection element is collecting the DNA cards, because each dinosaur requires a certain number of cards in order to make a dinosaur. So you need 2 Triceratops cards to make a Triceratops, but you need 4 Brachiosaur cards to make a Brachiosaur. But then the Brachiosaur points is much better, and actually you don't need to build the Brachiosaur in an enclosure. It can free roam around your park. Whereas otherwise you're going to have to go to market to build out an enclosure and maybe buy something from the market at the same time. It's overall, I would say that the core game element of it is a fairly by-the-numbers worker placement game. You go to a spot, you get an action, it makes sense what you're doing, but it's very well executed. It's thematic enough, and I think it's overall more enjoyable than Dinosaur Island or Geolosaur Island, which we played a couple of weeks ago, or even Dinosaur World. The difference really being the bit of your park and the bit of your facilities, you feel a little bit more like you're building a dinosaur park than these other games where you're more building theme park. It wouldn't have to be dinosaurs. This one kind of has to be dinosaurs. There's risks, there's events every turn, there's risks that can happen by having dinosaurs break free, which is somewhat apparent in these other games, but they don't manifest the same way. I would say it's much more straightforward and kind of your own fault if you get if you don't feed a T-Rex because you didn't go to the goat spot, then that's on you when it breaks out,
Well, you can go to the channel and check out our playthrough of Dinosaur World. That was me and Michael, and our final thoughts on that as well after our game. I've still got Dinosaur World, despite the fact that I've got the Kickstarter edition that came with all the plastic dinosaurs that were screen printed, and it's got the Arctic woolly mammoth ones and the deep sea ones as well. And it actually says in the box as well, don't play with both expansions. And I can understand why, because it makes it a little bit too crunchy. Right. And also, actually, the Water Dinosaurs expansion just kind of sucks because it adds this algae element that you constantly have to spend actions to clean up. And it's like, the problem with the base game is not that there's not enough garbage in my park that I need to spend actions to clean up. Yeah. But yeah, I was not sort of super excited by Dinosaur World, and if it weren't for all the screen printed creatures, which are brilliant, and the little cars and things, which are brilliant, I think it could easily be a fun, fair game. It's the theme. I mean, there is a riskometer that is mitigated by security.
Yeah.
And I do enjoy that. I do enjoy the sort of the concept of high risk, but there's no function in the game where the sort of the risk manifests as like sort of deaths or escaped dinosaurs or anything like that thematic. It's just penalty. It's just points penalty at the end of the game. Yeah.
Well, I mean, similar thing. Obviously, everything's abstracted to a degree. I don't know. I think it's solid. I'd be very interested in what the expansion brings.
Yeah, because it's had 2 print runs, hasn't it? The first, and then the second print run was the Controlled Chaos expansion, and then this is actually the third crowdfunding campaign or print run, what have you, which has added another expansion, right?
Yes, as far as I'm aware, I didn't get a chance to play this until the campaign had ended. But I think, once Late Pledge opens, we'll twist some arms and see if somebody in the group won't pick it up. Because I think it's well worth playing. If I had more space, yeah, I would definitely.
For sure. Well, I did actually back that campaign.
Did you?
Yeah, well, I'd heard really good things about the original print runs, and I'd wanted to get my hands on a copy for a little while. So I did end up backing it. So maybe I'll come and we can play it on BGA, and I'll see if I regret my decision.
I played a number of dinosaur games, but one of the longest waits for Kickstarter games I've had was Apex Theropod. So I think I backed that in 2014, and I only got it last year.
Wow.
And then it was not good.
So you waited basically almost 10 years for that.
Yep. Yeah, I went through various iterations of who was going to fulfill it.
Oh my God.
Type deal. But eventually came, and absolute fair, total credit to the guys that took it over. And then I spent, an hour sleeving the 1,200 cards, and then I played it, and then I was like, oh. I was very disappointed. I said, maybe I got something wrong. And I played it again. I was just like, nah, this isn't a lot of fun. So I got rid of it.
Oh dear. Well, that's a pity.
It sure is. Anyway, speaking of games that you're looking forward to, that ended up not being that exciting. This one is another game I managed to play now, my own copy, a Gest of Robin Hood. So we've been talking about this for 6 episodes now, I'm sure. But finally got it to the table and got a game in. This is published by GMT Games, and designed by Fred Serval. Which, as you say, disclosure, more than I do.
Full disclosure, not only did I receive a review copy of A Gest of Robin Hood from GMT Games, I also know Fred. He's a personal friend of mine.
Yeah. So let's just slate him. No, that's not what's going to happen here.
So let's find out why Barry played this one wrong, because he hasn't enjoyed it, so he must have played it wrong.
only possible reason. But Gest of Robin Hood is another 2-player only game, designed partly as an introductory level counter-insurgency game. So that counter-insurgency game is one that provides asymmetric warfare between an irregular force, such as guerrillas, or in this case Robin Hood, against the standard military or government of the time. And GMT have published a number of games, counter-insurgency games, so much so they're just called coin games, right? CO, counter-insurgency.
Although I think this is the second one that's actually 2 players. I think the rest can be played at 2, but are generally considered to be 4-player games. Yeah,
fine. But GMT also publish a whole bunch of war games, and a number of them are 2-player as well. But they're different. Like in terms of the scope of the game, they're slightly different. So from a war game, counterinsurgency is very much its own thing. One force is typically weaker in many respects than the sort of status quo powers who might have access to more things. And the aim for the I don't want to say terrorist player, but the underdog is to kind of swing public opinion and to disrupt supply lines and do all these different things that might be slightly different than you would in a straight up, we've both got tanks, let's shoot each other type war game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It models a more complex style of warfare.
Yes. And so in this game, one player takes on the role of Robin Hood, of the semi-fictitious, quasi-fictitious, I'm not sure how fictitious Robin Hood is, whether he was based on a real-life character or not. I've not looked into the lore since playing this again. But the other side is, of course, the Sheriff of Nottingham, who gives that player opportunities to do their best Alan Rickman voice, as I play as Kevin Costner. So in this game, Robin fights for justice, and the Sheriff is fighting for order, or maintaining order. And it's across a tug-of-war track, potentially up to 21 turns, although if any player gets to a scoring segment of the game, scoring third of the game with 6 points, they automatically win.
Yep.
And so gameplay takes the form of every turn you'll flip an event, and you'll see what that event is. Then the first player, determined by the initiative track, selects whether they will perform a single action from their unique action pool. Take the beneficial part of the event. There's always a good thing for Robin Hood and a good thing for the sheriff. Might not always be applicable in the turn it's flipped, but there are reasons to take it, even if it's not good for you, just because the thing for the other side would be great. Or you can take the bigger action pool, perform a triple action and a secondary action to get a bigger turn. But if you take the single action, you're guaranteed to be first next turn, and if you take the motley action, you're guaranteed to be last that next turn. So there's a balance between, well, I really want to see what's coming up next, or I don't have a lot to do, I don't have a lot of money, I'll just take the single action and hope to get in a better position for next turn, versus I really want to take the event, but that'll leave open initiative for the other player, or it leaves open the multiple action slot, versus or go straight into the multiple action slot, but know that you are definitely going in last into the next round. So the kind of things Robin Hood's trying to do is turn towns to revolt, build camps, expand their crew of merry men, and generally just be a thorn in the side for the sheriff, and that will get you justice points. But the sheriff is trying to keep towns submissive, ensure that they can transport goods into Nottingham to earn points, as well as capturing Robin Hood. Capturing Robin Hood's not the end of the game for Robin Hood, they can break out of jail, but all of these things help maintain order, which is how the sheriff wins. So each side has their own board of actions. There's like 3 or 4 actions on the top half for your, what are they called? Plots. And there's 3 or 4 deeds. Right, so these are the 2 sort of action types. Each one a little different. Sorry, I say each one a little different. I mean, both sides have completely different actions, but they're both
sides are totally asymmetrical.
Yeah, like there's nothing the same on either of those boards. Now, theoretically, the sheriff player starts with a bit more cash, but they have to pay out money to move their enforcers around a lot more. Robin Hood starts with lesser cash. They still need to spend some money to maybe turn a parish to their side, or build a camp, things along those lines. But they're going to be getting money by robbing people out in the streets or in the woods, whereas the sheriff can tax the parishes, or can move carts, move goods into Nottingham to earn additional cash that way. And that, having money gives you more options.
Having money is pretty vital, really.
Yeah. And as Robin Hood, you're doing all the things that I mentioned. You can, a lot of the time you're revealing your pieces. So in fact, there's a thing I should probably have mentioned. At the start of the game, and at various points, you'll get the opportunity to turn your pieces face down, and the sheriff doesn't know whether it's Robin Hood or your bog standard merry man. However, at times, revealing Robin Hood will allow you to take a more powerful action, or similarly, revealing merry men will let you, or you have to, in order to rob an area or do other actions. And all this time, the sheriff player is trying to figure out where Robin Hood is to move in the enforcers to send them to jail, as well as break up the camps and just capture merry men and things along those lines.
Yeah, the sort of the hidden element of Robin Hood and the Merry Men is a fun little bluffing game, and it's certainly important to be able to position those pieces correctly, and you can certainly gain an advantage from revealing Robin Hood at the right time. I do think it's significant, but I don't think it's the core focus of Nottingham.
No. Because once you're revealed, it's not too hard to hide yourself again. Sorry, that's not true. It's not too hard to turn yourself face down again, but it's pretty obvious to the sheriff where you are.
Yeah, unless you're sort of changing position or you have a lot of married men with you.
Yeah.
or you're going into a position with lots of other married men, it can very much telegraph your position. But the other thing that's worth noting about that is actually Robin Hood's kind of a pain for Nottingham, because he's like, out of all of the merry men, he's the one that can do the daring to escape from prison, because once they're arrested, they go to prison. And the married men are actually quite hard to get back. The merry men are quite hard to get back from prison, whereas Robin Hood, he breaks out all the time. It's dead easy. He just does a daring escape and off he goes. So, it's actually, in a way, better to just let Robin Hood be. The advantage, really, to revealing Robin Hood is it stops him from doing the actions the benefits he gets from revealing himself until he hides again. So it sort of delays his
more powerful moves.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean that's broad strokes. The game's kind of split into thirds. At every third of the game, an event will be revealed where you're going to tally up to see if anybody's won. If not, the board somewhat resets, and that's an opportunity for the Robin Hood player to turn his people face down again, regrouping the forests, and that'll happen twice throughout the game, and then the final scoring, and whoever's higher up on the track, whether that's order or justice, will win the game.
Yeah, if you got the token on your side of the tug of war, right?
Yeah.
I guess it's worth mentioning the carriages as well, because there's an element of hidden information on the Nottingham side. Yeah, the sheriff will place little carriages that come out of the towns around Nottingham and then make their way slowly to Nottingham. And each caravan is a double-sided token, and on the reverse, it's got some hidden information. It might be full of shillings, and if Robin can just get his hands on it, it will be a great boon for the merry men. But it could also be an ambush. An ambush, and it could be full of guards, and they'll spring out and arrest Robin and the merry men. So both sides have some concealed information.
Yeah, and getting those carriages home can also provide order points for the sheriff, taking them closer to victory.
Well, I think each carriage actually that gets back to Nottingham is one order, and then some carriages are a bonus order. So potentially a big swing there as well if Robin ignores them.
Yeah. But then also the sheriff will try and protect them by having their guards within the areas that the wagons are moving through. There's a game there. Let's you can discover somewhat on your own as well. But so I've been looking forward to this. I thought it looked quite interesting. I played the game, and we played the first third of the game incorrectly. And this was done by where I mentioned if you're a first player, you choose which action, or if you've got the initiative, you choose which of the three action types you're taking, whether that's single action, the event, or the multi-action. But the way we were playing it is that both players would choose in initiative order, and then whoever was lower down on the track would go first. And that is incorrect. If you're first on the initiative, you will resolve whatever you pick immediately.
Yeah.
And so that does result in a couple sort of double turns. You can do the single action, then the multi-action, so you can get quite a lot done by being first player, and that initiative track is very important, and the choices that you make there is very important to what you're able to do. But the person I was playing with taught me wrong, as they always does. I don't think he's ever taught me a game correctly. You know how when you play a game, you just, we'll just fudge through the rules, and if we get something wrong, we'll pick it up again next time. And then you know how you learn the rules for next time? He never does that second part. Just whatever he learned the first time, he's like, yep, that'll do.
This is how this game is now.
Exactly. This is exactly how this game is. So we got that wrong, and I was like, I'm reading the rules, so I've got the rule book, and I'm like, this doesn't seem right. And I'm like, where did you get this information from? And he's like, I don't think we're playing right. So anyway, we reset it. We reshuffled the event deck because it's variable set up in terms of the events that come out. And we played the game properly. I stayed as Robin Hood. He stayed as the sheriff. And that time I actually very nearly won at that first inspection, that first King's tithing or whatever it's called.
The royal inspection. The
royal inspection, that's right. And I managed to pump out a few camps just on that last turn. and the sheriff wasn't able to do anything about it. But then there was like a weird event that, I forget what they're called. They're like an auto event that nobody does anything in, that automatically happen. Took away that point just before the inspection. And so
sabotage.
Yeah, a little bit. But then eventually played through the game, and I did win at the end. I had a couple of points on the track towards justice rather than order. But we got through the whole game for it. So there was a number of things I liked about the game, but mostly it was I didn't really enjoy it. So the good things about it was, I thought the economy, right? It was very tight. Getting money is important. Having money is important. The money being open, so you know exactly what your opponent's capable of, is super useful. If you know that they're broke, you know that they're not going to be coming into your area next turn to do something. So actually, you could take the single action, keep initiative, and do something else bigger the next turn. It was very good. It plays very quickly. It was definitely under 2 hours. In fact, I think it was probably under 2 hours even with the restart. So probably like 90 minutes once you know what you're doing.
I reckon it'll be even faster than that when people
are like, it doesn't
really
seem very lengthy as far as it goes, but there's a good number of decisions in the game for that length of time, and you're probably going to get 21. If you go to the end, you're probably going to get those 21 actions and a few extra kind of bits to choose from. And the game does try to lead you into learning how to play these kind of games. Gives you 3 or 4 openings for both sides, although arguably not the best one for either side. Which is fine. You want to be able to, you want to have something to discover, something to try out, something to learn for yourself. I think that's fine. The worst parts of it, actually something that I've not written down here, but the worst part is there's no player handout for what the other side can do.
Yeah. Okay. That's very reasonable. Yeah.
Right. And so the only way to find out, you want to be looking at that to start having those mind games. Right. What do I think they're going to do this turn? What would be the best thing they could do? Can I mitigate that in some way? And just always asking them, okay, well, what was your first action you could do again? Or how do you move people? And how much does that cost you? And just having, I might just do it, right? So just print out those player boards to give to the other player.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that would have been great to have like a sort of a summary of the opponent's board.
Yeah, because it's totally different from yours. You cannot make any extrapolations based on your actions as to what their actions are. So it's a very difficult
you've internalized both sides. It's just going to be a constant case of saying to your opponent, hey, how much does this cost you? What are you going to do there again? You know? Yeah, 100%.
For that one. Then the biggest complaint was after the first turn, let's say you have a big first turn, and do the plots and deeds, and I had a big first turn as Robin Hood, and then my second turn, there's nothing I want to do.
Right.
All of the actions I could do, none of them seem good. And it was the same for or at least the banter across the table was. It was the same for the sheriff player. They would have a decent turn, and then it'd be like, well, none of these are good anymore. And I think maybe we passed twice throughout the whole game, which gets a little bit of money, not a huge amount of money. So it was never like there was nothing. But I think unless I can, if I play more and it turns out that passing is actually a reasonable option, particularly for the sheriff who can get multiple coins by passing. But as Robin Hood, you would always try and rob if you could. So
you do have to reveal married men in order to rob.
Correct.
Married men. And so you will eventually have revealed all of your tricks if you try to rob too much.
But you will reset after the sort of 7 turns. Kind of thing. You won't always be anyway. I just felt both of us were there and we were just staring at our boards for the longest time and just like, I don't want to do any of these, and that's not fun.
No, I agree. It's it's interesting to hear you say that, because I'm not sure if this is exactly the same thing, but when I played the game, we certainly had. I don't think we arrived at because I played it twice with different opponents in both times. Unfortunately, I would like to play it again with the same opponent, but I haven't had the chance. But I think, while we haven't arrived at a point where we're like, oh, none of these actions are any good, we certainly arrived at a point where we were like, I don't know what is good to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, I think, maybe partly by dint of not having access to the opponent's actions in front of you. I also think there's, if I remember correctly, I was a little, not annoyed is too strong a term, but I was surprised to discover there wasn't a good summary of what you do to actually get points.
Yeah, like it's not obvious which are point scoring actions and which aren't. Again, once it's internalized, fine, but
because I think, exactly. Once it's internalized, it's okay. But I think Nottingham, largely gets points for destroying Robin Hood's camps and getting carriages back to Nottingham. And I feel like that's a little unintuitive. You feel like you should be getting points for arresting married men and Robin Hood, which doesn't actually get you any points.
But the thing with the sheriff destroying camps, that only gets you a point back because Robin Hood will have scored a point by building that camp. So you're not progressing, you're just not.
Well, but I think that argument could be made for all the points in the game because
there has to be a way of making points, otherwise people won't.
Well, yeah, but every point you make removes your opponent's point if it's on their side.
But if Robin Hood never builds a camp, you can never get a point from removing a camp. I mean, obviously,
I see what you mean.
Obviously, they're going to, but
to that, yes, I understand what you mean. There's also points awarded, I think, for the number of towns in rebellion at the beginning of the royal inspection. And, if you've not understood the full functions of the royal inspection until you get there, that can also be a little unintuitive. I mean, and the thing is, the game is still quite complex for a game.
Mm-hmm.
But just not by the standards of these sorts of games. And so it's, I think it's sort of one of those things where you can just run through it. But if you do just if you decide you're going to learn by doing, then you might still have your head down in the rules a lot. And also it's not necessarily super intuitive because there's not sort of hand-holdy player aids.
Yep. All true.
Probably could have done benefiting from those. Anyway, I'll let you carry on.
But just a couple other things. There was a couple of times where a player would sacrifice an action to get initiative for the next round.
Yep.
In part, and remember, we're at times we were not struggling for something to do, but just like I didn't want to do something because the sheriff would just take it back after me. Right? It was that kind of play. Might be worth doing, right? Just drain the resources for the sheriff player. But anyway, sometimes the event would be unimpactful for both players. Neither player would want it.
Yeah.
And other times, being first would be absolutely crucial. You had to get on that event, or you were going to lose the game.
Yep.
And not knowing when those turns were was it was random. Sure, that's part of what the events are there to simulate, but they were not all of equal value.
Yeah, and I hear that criticism, and it's very accurate. Particularly towards the end of the game, where maybe certainly in the third sort of phase, because as Barry says, there's these royal inspections. They do go they're going to hand out some points and some money and things, and go some way to resetting the board, and then after that second reset happens and you're in the third act of the game, certainly you can get to, I found particularly in that act, you can get to board states where quite a lot of the events are like, no, I can't make use of this now, it's too late.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then just the last part was, it seems relatively easy to get locked out, either with a bad dice roll for robbing something. You could always build up to that robbery to guarantee that it will always go through, but you don't know until you start the robbery what you're going to need.
Yeah, but I mean, the robbery does give you two options, right?
Yes, you can kill
and the
them
hard option.
or smack their bum, send them on their way. Kind of deal. And usually the top half isn't as bad. The very first card I flipped over as a robbery was Guy of Gisborne, right? So Guy of Gisborne. And then we're like, wait a minute, he's really tough. Should he be in there? And then we went back through the rules and like, no, not to start with.
No, he's added by an event.
Yeah. I was like, okay, cool. That almost ended it earlier than we thought. And we didn't have too much impact. Like as Robin Hood, if you go around killing people to get more money, that can come back and bite you later because that powers up some of the sheriff's events.
What you've got is the sort of the random mooks deck, and these are people that you're going to waylay and rob. And whenever you flip the card over, you've got the option to sort of politely redistribute their wealth because it's the right thing to do, or like viciously murder them and take everything that they love. And if you do the latter, they'll end up in what's called the victims pile. And certain things will reference the victims pile. The more victims in it, the more punishment Robin Hood will receive when that's brought up.
It's much harder to win over the hearts and minds when you're going around killing people.
Yeah, when you've got a stack of corpses in the basement.
But it did seem as if, particularly as a Robin Hood player, there's a couple of things I could have done that almost ended up with me being locked out. I couldn't move away. I couldn't really get money. The sheriff had reasonable luck on me, and that could be how the game's designed. But I also never really felt like I got out of the woods, right? So the Nottingham woods, like it's really hard to get far away, to move multiple times, to do anything at the further away parishes.
You never got the Duke of Retford event that swaps him to your side?
No, I want to say no.
Sad.
And then but there was a couple of things that allowed the sheriff to spread out, move to any parish, and so they were able to kind of hem me in. And I guess again, if that's part of the game, fine. But it just meant, well, I don't want to do this because I'll just be there and you'll just capture me. I don't want to build a camp here because you'll just swing it back the next turn. And it could be that maybe I should be doing that to drain the sheriff's resources, but it also drains my resources and I have less.
I do think that there is a sort of a point to that, in that I think Robin Hood generally needs less money than the sheriff, and actually can also, because of the rob action, come by it more readily. Mm-hmm. So I do think utilizing your money to force the sheriff to take more expensive actions more frequently is the right thing to do. You can move around your people, I think, a bit more freely, right?
Depends. I mean, when you start, you've got half the map to move into. There's not a lot of mooks around. And actually, during the game, I did get into Nottingham and started robbing the sheriff.
Which you can do. But I just mean, like, I think both sides have a sort of a basic move action, right? And Robin Hood kind of benefits from moving sort of in groups of two and spreading out more, because it's half the cost. So like when you move, you can move from a location and then it's like 1 shilling per location you're moving out of. But with the sheriff, it's 2.
Yeah.
It's 2 shillings. So it's just twice as expensive just to move around. So I think, Robin Hood sort of benefits from sort of putting out little parties all across the board and trying to influence towns that way. And, force the sheriff to sort of, the danger is, of course, that, if you're a low number of merry men in any given location, you can just be arrested.
Yeah, they'll just get captured. So anyway, that was that. Like, I'll maybe give it another go, but it was less. I don't know. It was less fun than I hoped.
I recognize all of the observations you've made. I shared some of my own there. I also found the rule book, it was in typical GMT style, very sort of like, yes, very meticulous and detailed, but also just, oh God, it's a lot. even for a game that's, you know, supposed to be their entry level. It's a lot. I think that, you know, I was probably helped coming into this because I had already played the British way, which is the other version of this sort of thing, which is to say a 2-player counterinsurgency head-to-head game. And British way is more complex. It's, you know, 1940 something, and the Palestinians are revolting against the British occupation at the end of the Second World War. So there are some elements that I was expecting, which is to say I was familiar already with the initiative track, which is of course the 3 different moves and how they trigger main actions and also sort of like the secondary action. And I think that how to value those is quite inscrutable if you're not familiar with the system, which as far as I'm aware has only been deployed in this one other game, albeit it is reasonably similar to how counterinsurgency games work. But I think the act of single plot is, I think the temptation, particularly if you're the Sheriff of Nottingham with all the money at the start, is to go plots and deeds and do big things. But actually, I think timing deeds correctly is a huge part of the game because they're so expensive to do. And if you don't set them up correctly, they can just be shut down right away. You know, because deeds is things like, you know, arresting a bunch of people, capturing them, or, you know, flipping a town to revolt or vice versa, setting up a camp. You know, Robin Hood can reveal himself and just give away all the money he's captured, which can get points. But, you know, it's you got to be able to set that up and reveal Robin Hood and take a deed, which the bigger cost of is losing the initiative. I think being in front and being able to sort of continually bogart the single plot space is huge because often you can just be setting up to do a really good deed when you're ready. And 2, you're bogarting that right to take that powerful event when it comes. And I do agree that like some of the events in this game did seem inconsequential. I thought that was more common in this than in something like British Way, where they seem to have a bit more of an impact more consistently. But the events are also very potentially huge, you know, and the randomness of that, I think, is common to all war games, really, historical war games. You know, they're games that are based more around sort of modeling real world events and historical moments, and they care more about that than balance. You know, they do have to be balanced, but you know, there's you know, if you've ever played Twilight Struggle, you'll know about all of the events in that can just swing the game wildly if you're unfamiliar with them and unprepared for them. So, you know, that's the same applies to an extent to this, albeit, you know, I think it probably, if you were working to sort of hold the initiative in order to mitigate the worst of the events, I do think you would probably feel a little less, I don't want to say bad, but maybe a little less, it would feel a little less unintuitive if the events were a little more consequential more often.
Yeah, potentially. But, to that end, like I got rid of Twilight Struggle because it's like getting good at it's like a job.
Well, I mean, I think that, you know, when I talk to Fred about like, you know, historical games, and I'm like, well, what do you recommend to people? You know, what should they get? Fred's answer's always the same. He says, get one that's set in a historical period that you're interested in. You know, don't worry too much about the mechanisms or the rules. Find something that's got a setting with historical events and characters that are real people that you're actually interested in learning about. And I think that's kind of a really important point because, you know, they are games that sort of prioritize that historical element, maybe even over sometimes game balance. And I don't want to say fun, but, you know, it may be ease of access.
Yeah. Well, I maybe told this story before, but I had Twilight Struggle. I played it a few times, and then I went to Expo one year, and I played against a friend there, and he'd just come in off the back of 200 games against another friend, and he beat me on like turn 1. Like, it wasn't even, it just wasn't even close. And I was like, okay, fine. Yeah, forced me to pull the trigger on the nukes, like turn 1 somehow.
Oh,
like,
yes. Yeah. So you went to DEFCON Red, and then he took like the action that lets him play one of your cards, and then that causes the nukes to go off,
and I was just like,
lose.
Okay, fine. I guess that will happen then. And so just, you got to learn all those, and the swings of the cards, like what's that, De Gaulle action that, there's no point going into France until that happens, or there's no point, what you have to start an action in Iraq as your first thing, like the whole meta and the starting and the openings, that kind of thing. And
I can't remember all the ins and outs myself.
Correct. I couldn't either, which is why I got rid of it.
Yeah. But I do still enjoy playing it. I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis is something you have to be totally aware of, and I can't for the life of me remember what it actually does. But I do still enjoy playing Twilight Struggle, but absolutely it's not a game I could play against someone who'd played 200 games of. I've played maybe 10 games of Twilight Struggle, and I can just about teach it and execute the rules. I feel like I should mention I'm really keen to play more Gest. I feel like I came off the back of that like, yeah, there's some real problems here, but I didn't mention that I do want to play it again, actually. I'm really excited to play more Gest of Robin Hood, especially now that I've played it with a couple of people who've played it before. So I was probably a little bit more enthusiastic after my plays than you are. I don't know if you'll play it again, but we'll see. I'll see if I get it back to the table, or if the people I played it against are
enthusiastic. It's also on Board Game Arena, and I did suggest that we have a game at some point.
Yeah, let's get that in the schedule as well before we do the next show for sure.
Play both sides. I wouldn't mind a go as Nottingham just to see what the differences are.
Yeah, absolutely. I've played one side each time, so I'm more than happy to pick up either side. Right, nice. And I'd love to play it on BGA actually as well, because that's then we don't have to worry about that rule book as much. Yeah.
Keeps you right.
You can sit there with your player boards as well and look at them both.
Oh, even just the ability to hover over and see what the other side's actions are. But that's all for me. Obviously, I'll have a number of games again next time coming in off BarryCon. But let's tail it. You've done the tops. What's the tails?
Well, before I move into my big, exciting finale, which is the one you've all been waiting for, I assume, because it was another darling of Essen, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to a game I've been playing. I just played through. It's a game I picked up at Essen 2023 called Dungeons of Doria. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because it's coming back to crowdfunding. It was a print and play for a long time. Then it was crowdfunded. It got an actual print run, and then that was delivered to backers last year, and there was a handful of copies left, and I got given one at SN23, and I demoed it there, and I remember quite enjoying it. It is a dungeon crawler. You're a party of adventurers. Anyway, Dungeons of Doria is designed by Victor Arens, and it's self-published. As far as I'm aware, there's not actually a publishing company attached, like a name at all. Just self-published by Victor Arens, the designer, who's also the artist, along with some other contributors as well. It is a cooperative dungeon crawling game set in the fantasy world of Doria, which I don't know much about. I know that it's populated by RPG trope adventurers and RPG trope monsters. And the game is described by the designer as a loot crawler. So the premise here is that you're going into the dungeon, you're acquiring loot and continuing to acquire loot as you go, and leveling up your character and looting up. Getting loot is really important in the game. It has got a campaign mode, which is it's not a big campaign. It's not a strong narrative campaign, but there is some narrative to sort of move you from scenario to scenario, of which there would be about 6. A scenario takes anywhere from I'd say probably about 90 minutes to 2 hours. And, I don't know how much bigger they get, because I've only played the demo at SN23 and then one game, which was not the campaign. It was the single adventure scenario, which I played with Mark of Not Board Gaming, who's also got a review copy. And so we were playing through this, and there is... So the rulebook does one of my cardinal sins, which is not enough pictures. Picture tells 1,000 words. Show more pictures. And it's also, clearly a game that's sort of been developed over time with sort of different elements and mechanisms being added. Having said that, for a largely solo delivery, the iconography and everything else is not bad. There are some funny exceptions that I wish were slightly clearer, but overall, once we got sort of through the rules and into the swing of it, we were doing all right. Now, I'm not 100% confident we're playing correctly, but I also don't know that we weren't. So, and it seemed challenging, and we had a good time. So there's that. It is a D10 system, and it also uses exploding dice. So you're rolling handfuls of D10, typically sort of 2 to 4, depending on your level and the loot you've got. And if you roll a 10, you get to roll another D10 and add it. And if you roll 2 1s, you fumble and have a critical failure. So nice dicey system. Huge loot decks full of tons of random stuff, including traps. You might just draw a trap from the loot deck and then, trap goes off and now you're having a bad time. And the art's really quite inconsistent. Like, the characters and the monsters all look great. The art on the loot cards is very small, but it looks good. The tiles are what I would describe as the GMT school of art, which is to say, clear. It is clear what the space has been. But it does kind of look like we're wandering around the D&D map your friend drew on, like, Photoshop. So I think that might be off-putting for some people. Mark and I were not particularly bothered by it. It's a grid system for us to play on, and we draw the tiles. And it's got some fun stuff going on as well. Like, the tiles are all quite wildly different. Like, sometimes you might just draw like a cul-de-sac or a sort of a very short dead end. And other times you might draw this room that's open on both sides, and then you draw 2 more tiles. And so you could just find a tiny crawl space, or you could reveal an enormous cavern, which is a fun concept. The monsters are also... The monster deck's quite fun when you have to spawn a monster. You flip over a card, it puts out a random creature, but you can also flip over monster modifiers. So it's like, oh, this is a Black Knight, but it also breathes acid, and you can flip over multiple modifiers, and some suddenly find you've revealed a boss monster right in the middle of things. Oh, this is a ghoul, but also it's shrouded in darkness, and it breathes fire, and it's got a door for a shield. And yeah, I against all odds, I found myself really enjoying this a lot more than I thought I would. It's very swingy, and it is, I think, very possible to not find a whole lot of loot you can use. And so you have to level up your character in a certain direction. But certainly in the sort of single player adventure mode, single adventure mode, the rewards, the loot, the level ups are metered out at a rate that's sort of compelling and fun and enjoyable. And we had this scenario where we had to track down a troll and recover some goods for the innkeeper, and the troll was trying to destroy a bridge so it could get away on the other side. And just by happenstance, when we revealed the room the troll was in, it was quite a large room, and on the other end there was a labyrinth that just happened to come out with this terrible creature right in the middle of it that was quite slow. And this was all just random. But the slow creatures, so we had to run into the middle of this cavern and then sort of resolve the scenario with the troll, which involved distracting it from destroying the bridge long enough so we could kill it. Meanwhile, this really slow monstrosity that just happened to generate this really strong monster was slowly walking towards us, putting real pressure on us to try and resolve this business with the troll as quickly as possible. And it was kind of nice that sort of happened and created this sort of threat. And it was funny as well because we'd been commenting up until that point. We hadn't drawn many of the monster modifiers, so maybe they were all shuffled together in this stack of cards. And then suddenly, it spawns out this major enemy, which made the actual boss look like, a puppy dog.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we're gonna do a live stream of that. At least I'll do a solo one. Maybe Mark will join me if scheduling works out. But we'll do a live stream when that's back on crowdfunding. So if that sort of thing interests you, like swingy, dungeon crawly, loot based adventuring, it's worth checking out. It's artistically all over the shop, and it is also a little bit of a slog to get through the rule book just because it's written by the designer and, a one sort of person show. But but surprisingly, I didn't feel at the end of the play, we were into it. We really enjoyed it in the end. So we got over all that stuff.
Nice. Well, again, campaign, dungeon crawls they're off as soon as I'm retired, sure.
Well, this is very much not. It very much doesn't have to be a campaign, right. And even the campaign is very short compared to like most campaign games. It's sort of linked scenarios, and I think it's really if you like the character you're building and you want to hold on to some loot between sessions. Mm-hmm. But I think that's not the main selling point of this. The main selling point is definitely the sort of the one-off loot crawl, scenarios. And it looks like there's sort of been a community that's come together around the print and play version of the game when it was free and everyone was just making their own thing. And they've been sort of, contributing scenarios and various bits and pieces of content. And it's nice as well because there's some extra stuff you can add to zhuzh things up. So if you don't want to do a scenario, you can add in this module called room events, and then each room has a special event, and that's apparently quite good to do if you want some challenge and stuff, but not necessarily to have a structured scenario to play through. And then there's door events, which apparently make it much more difficult. So every time you open a door, something triggers from an adventure book. So there's some nice modules that you can go and reference as well that have been written, but I haven't tried those, so I don't know how well that goes.
Cool.
So that's Dungeons of Doria, and come subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss the playthrough of that. If you want to see me get upset about dice, because I rolled loads of 10s in the learning game, so I'm guaranteed tons of fumbles on the live stream. Yeah, I got
that sounds like science.
Yeah, that's real science. And speaking of science, it's time for our big finale, SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. This is a 1 to 4 player competitive Eurogame published by Czech Games Edition, or CGE, and designed by Thomas Hollick. I played this at Essen at 3 players. I've just played it once. This is a game where you are a corporation of space researchers on Earth. You are building probes and launching them into outer space on the search for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. And it's very Euro. So it's a 6-round Euro game, and after 6 rounds, the game line will go to final scoring. It's a real sort of points bonanza. You're going to get points from all over the place. Probably you earned most of your points during the game, but there is some amount of endgame scoring as well. But what you've got is a player board that has a series of core actions on it. And those core actions can be launch a probe into space and potentially land it on another planet. So your probe becomes a lander, like the Mars rover, lands on planet, does a heckin' explore. You've got SETI radar dish action, which launches signals out into space. And this is sort of like a little area control thing you're doing on different sectors of the universe. And then you've got the supercomputer action, which involves you gathering data tokens. And when you've got those data tokens, you can invest them into your supercomputer. The three tracks for each of these actions can be upgraded by purchasing tiles that slot into different spots and improve the action. They can be done in any order. So although everyone's got the same action spaces and the same access to the same tokens, you can sort of be a bit asymmetrical by dint of which spaces you choose to actually upgrade. The sort of purpose of the game is to find these traces of alien life. And when a certain number of traces have been discovered by all players, then one of the 2 alien races that you've put out at the beginning of the game will be revealed. So there's something like 5 alien races in the box, and you'll put 2 out during setup onto the board, and they'll be hidden, so you don't know which 2 they are. And then when the traces are discovered, one will be the one with all the traces, will be flipped up, and this will implement new rules. Now, I only saw 1 during our play because we didn't find the other aliens. I guess we weren't very good at what we were doing. But the one I did see, it did add more tracks, more Euro tracks to the game. It also added a set of cards. So there are cards in the game that you can have a hand of, and these cards are multifunctional. I'll talk about the functions in a minute. But the new alien race added more of those cards, but they were like souped up and more powerful. So that was their sort of unique mechanism. Again, not a super big change on the game's core mechanisms, but enough that, it felt like interesting, and it would be interesting to see how that comboed potentially with other aliens. And it was interesting to sort of get involved with that. There was an element of race to it as well, where the alien cards would allow you to put out discs on another track. And if you found out enough about those aliens, you'd catch up with that disc and get further benefits. So it's sort of this new mechanism of like sort of investing and then paying off your investments, which was nice. Like, it wasn't revolutionary, but it was a cool thing that wasn't in the game when we started playing, right? And just revealing that to be in the game partway through was a nice twist. The actual round structure has you taking actions on your turn, and you have to spend resources to do those actions, and those resources are money and energy. And you will never have enough of either. Mm-hmm. And you can use those cards in your hand for 3 actions, one of which is to invest them into your company, in which case they go under your starting card and they improve your round-to-round income of money and energy. And to an extent, at the start of the game, you've got a handful of cards. You're going to be looking at those cards and thinking, these give me all energy or money, or maybe a nice mixture of both. But it's helpful to be able to analyze what you can invest into your company. And again, this is sort of flavorful description, right? Like you're going to get the action that lets you lay a card under another card to accrue symbols for income. But you're investing things in your company, Mm-hmm. And being able to look at what resources you will be able to add to your income and what actions that will allow you to take in the future, because some actions are very energy intensive and some are very monetarily intensive, is helpful to guiding you into a strategy. I heard from Mark that in the solo mode, these opening rounds are dull because you're kind of building up and you're not really doing anything exciting. And also they feel quite rote because you don't have a lot of variety. You're kind of locked into what your hand can do. And I totally see that criticism. It didn't manifest for us in the 3-player game. And having spoken to a few other people who've played at a lower count, I think this might actually get more mileage out of higher count. And I think 3 or 4. And I think the reason for that is probably because, when you're at a higher player count, there's more stuff going on that keeps you engaged, and you'll be less likely to notice that while you sort of get the fundamentals of your engine in place. Because the sort of the core novelty of this game is the rotating solar system. So the board itself is a sort of a top-down circular view of the solar system with the sun in the middle, and then a number of what we should call incomplete rondelles coming out of the sun, which represent the planets moving around the sun. And you'll sit on these, and then they will move, and they will move at different rates, and you may be brought closer to celestial bodies you're trying to access, and you may be brought further away from them. But as you're shooting probes out of Earth, they're going to go into these spaces, which are then going to rotate and shift and move. And they're more likely to do that at higher player counts. So this whole dynamic sort of orbiting system is much more likely to move and move significantly between your turns if you're playing with more people, which I think is a sort of more dynamic and interesting part of the game. Because if you can plan around it correctly, then you can get big benefits off it, and that feels really good. Similarly, if you were hoping it wouldn't move, or you were expecting it not to move, and then it does, that creates a nice conundrum or dilemma. Some people might describe that as really annoying because now I don't have enough energy. But I thought it was a fun dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, the multifunctional cards, as well as being able to be invested in your company, they've also got a really powerful ability on them that you can trigger if you actually get a card play, which is quite expensive, or you can actually play them for a free action as well. Each one comes with a free action, and sometimes that's a boost. So if you're moving a probe, it lets you move the probe an extra step, and sometimes it's other little bonus actions that you can do. So that's a nice, I do like a good multifunctional card, and the dilemma around those cards was nice and compelling. There is a publicity track, which is how you upgrade your player board, but you can pull, so you get up to 6 publicity, you pull back, you get to do an upgrade. But if you pull back from earlier steps, then you will get different kinds of benefits. So there's a nice dilemma there as well. This is definitely more complex than Galilei which is the same designer. It is, I would say, verging on heavyweight. Certainly a lot of interlocking hobby concepts here, like upgrading your player board and area majority in different sectors of space and, things like that. First come, first serve on a lot of high victory point spaces. But again, I would describe this as a solid Euro puzzle, a fun puzzle. I'm excited to play it again. I actually thought the variable setup made this more compelling for me than typical Euros of this kind of weight and style. I like the idea of 2 alien races and potentially revealing both and seeing different combinations, of the 5 that are available in the game. There's a big deck of cards. We didn't make it through the whole deck. We didn't even come close. So that's nice because, it means I'm going to get to see a lot of new cards the next time I play. And, it's minimal player interaction, slightly more player interaction in this one because of the rotating star system, because when players pass, that causes the planets to rotate. If you can predict when they're going to pass, you can somewhat preempt that. If you don't know, you don't know. Additionally, there's cards you can draft into your hand when you pass, and that's first come, first served. So passing early gets you first choice of those cards, which is nice. Again, if you're sort of, player interaction is still relatively minimal, and if you're over this sort of thing, then it's not going to scratch that itch for you. It's not going to reignite your passion for this kind of gaming. But if you like this sort of stuff, it's another sort of solid example of the genre. I would say it's probably it's better than average for sure. I thought it was more compelling than average. And the board is really pretty. The novelty of the solar system moving around is really nice. It's very functional. It wasn't annoying. It didn't get knocked or move around at all. So, overall, yeah, I really enjoyed my play of SETI. This also was a review copy given to me by the publisher.
I've seen SETI, and obviously very popular at this point. Particularly coming off the back of Essen, the weightings, or the Board Game Geek stats say best at 3, so along the lines of what you're thinking, and the weight wise, it's 3.71 versus Galileo's 2.9 odds. But the difference between a 3 and a 3.7 is actually quite significant, I would say, on Board Game Geek weighting. So yeah, should be a bit heavier. Yeah, looks good. I wouldn't mind giving it a go.
I think it does a good job of capturing its theme. It's obviously a little fantastical because you do actually make contact with aliens during the game, which is nice. I had hoped to see like a bad alien race, and then when you make contact with them, if you have to like try to avoid them somehow. But I don't know if that exists. Maybe it does, but I don't know.
Bad aliens.
But yeah, we I think when we played, I felt like we also did reasonably different strategies, and different things. It didn't feel like we're all doing the same sort of stuff. And given that there's only sort of 3 action tracks on your player board that you can sort of do at its core, that's relatively straightforward. But the timing around things is also like really important, like the triggering of the supercomputer, which lets you get a trace, which is going to let you take a spot. That's very telegraphed. So there's, you can look at your opponent and say, okay, how much data do they have in their supercomputer? Are they in a position to get this trace and take this spot I want? Likewise, do they have enough energy to land that probe as a rover and take this thing that I want? So I think that subtlety of people's capacity being clearly telegraphed, and you being able to weigh up the timing of, should I even bother going for that? Are they going to get it before me? Should I spend this extra resource to go now to make sure I get there ahead of them? That's all quite clearly telegraphed, and that's the kind of timing stuff I really like to be considering in these sorts of games with these passive player interactions.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Deserving of all the hype?
That's a challenging question, actually. Oh no, Barry's triggered my end of podcast lecture. No, I don't know. I think I don't like to get on board the hype train. But very often like games get hype because they're good. And game publishers like CG will pick up something like SETI and make it their tentpole game at Essen because it's a good design. So it's not like it's not all marketing gimmicks. They play hundreds of prototypes. And you don't just make your main release of the year a first-time designer, albeit one with 3 releases in the same year. But you don't make it a first-time designer unless the game shows a lot of promise. And that's not to say CG aren't above taking risks. They put out Deal with the Devil last year, but I think it's good that they still take risks. But that I think you can also notice the difference in the hype between Deal with the Devil and SETI, or how quickly that's shifted. If you like this sort of thing, this is, again, another really good one that I think you're going to enjoy. And I think you'll get more plays out of this than your typical sort of Euro puzzle game because of the variable setup, because of the different aliens and the different combinations, because of the oversized deck of cards, and the rotating spacey board. I think that'll give you a bit more mileage than you would otherwise get if, you think about the sort of the total number of plays in a Euro puzzle. All right. Well, that's going to wrap up this session, this podcast.
Another
We're
one
going to
done.
have to check in a couple of weeks with Barry, find out what he played at BarryCon. We'll try to get Gest in on BGA, and I will be back to talk about what I've been playing, which should hopefully include Speakeasy by Vital Lacerda. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast to find out what we thought of all of that.
Nice one. Until then, bye.